Dr. Dana Tassone here with participants in HFT 6296, a graduate capstone course in hospitality management, discussing chapters 5 and 6 from the lecture notes. I have to tell you that I condensed a lot of information into these notes. Most of it just has to do with terminology, and what I'll do is try and frame this for you as best I can. In these chapters, the author was speaking from the very high ivory tower corporate part of an organization. So here we're talking about large corporations, and we're talking about the thinking that comes from those ivory towers, not so much at the SBU unit. The SBUs are really pawns in this particular type of game, corporate game. And in the beginning, we asked you to consider 3 types of corporate strategy. There's directional strategy, which could include growth, stability, and retrenchment. Growth to expand, stability, stay the same, and retrenchment, get smaller, do more with less. And the second thing we ask you to do is consider portfolio strategies, which is has to do with products and business units. And the third thing we ask you to do is, or he asked you to do, is to consider the concept of parenting, corporate parenting, which has to do with resource allocation and centralized management of business units, which obviously doesn't work for our industry. So growth strategies from this level mostly include mergers, acquisitions, and strategic alliances. Mergers is when a corporation takes over a firm, or when it blends with the firm. Acquisitions is when it takes over. Mergers is when it blends with a firm, and in theory the two firms become one. In my experience, that's not really true. The dominant firm is operating the less dominant firm. Interesting thing that happens with a merger is, and an acquisition, is that those individuals who are left from the less dominant organization are working within the framework of the dominant organization. So one would think that the dominant organization becomes the corporate culture for the merged or acquired company. That's not true. What does happen, assuming that the executives from the old firm still remain, is that a hybrid culture starts to emerge at the strategic business unit. However, this has nothing to do with the corporate thinking, strategic thinking. So the organizational culture at the corporate level, which is mostly, somebody I think identified this, mostly is shareholder focused, remains the same. It's just at the SBU unit where the organization starts to change. And strategic alliances are when two corporations become friendly competitors. Classic example of this is co-sharing among airline carriers, very commonly done. And that's all about maximizing the use of resources. So it's they maximize the use of resources, airline A, airline B, maximize the use of resources for a given geographical route, and they maximize the market share for that route for both airline companies. And that way they have the opportunity to grow in terms of passenger load. I think many of you have experienced mergers and acquisitions, or at least have heard about them. I know I've been through a number of them, and when these things happen, the transaction leading up to it, to the actual acquisition, if it's an acquisition phase, most of the ones I've been involved with were acquisitions. An acquisition could be friendly or unfriendly, and it could appear to be friendly but not really be friendly, and it could appear to be unfriendly and not really, and really be friendly. So only when you're inside the transactions that take place, I talk about transactions later in the notes, the transactions that take place, you really identify the nature of the acquisition. But the strategies involved in the transactions are really interesting to observe. as long as you're not losing your job. But I was involved in one. I worked for a very, very large corporate entity, and it owned a quite large complex in the state of Florida. And the complex had all kinds of amenities, and it included a living community for the rich and famous. And what happened is the financial firm took over the ownership of this community firm. Prior to that, the community members actually owned the property. And when it came time for the leader of that corporation to maximize the financial gain, they made an outrageous offer to the previous owners, who were the community members, and of course they scoffed at the offer. And then the owner, or the financial company, said, well, this particular complex, had everything, had golf courses, airstrips, all kinds of things. It's worth more singly than it is as a whole, so what we'll do is we'll just put it on the market and sell it to maybe the Japanese piece by piece. And of course this totally violated the culture of the community, because they had their rich and famous playground. Needless to say, what they did is they purchased the complex for an outrageous sum of money. So when you consider growth strategies, there are two concepts. There is concentration and there is diversification. Concentration is where strategies that aimed at growth within current product lines. So if it's a lodging company, it would add additional lodging companies to the portfolio. And diversification is when a corporation branches into different lines that may or may not be in line with the original direction of its holdings at the current time. And then there are three types of directional strategies, and there are two directions. One is vertical, up and down, and the other is side by side, horizontal. And we've talked about this before. And in vertical, you take that supply chain that I gave you earlier, you turn it on its side, and what you have is a line of entities from the source of a product all the way through the end user of the product, which provides services along with the product. And horizontally is when the organization or corporation adds to the existing portfolio of brands through additional market share, usually into global locations. Somebody I think mentioned in our discussions that conglomerates seem to be focused solely on shareholder benefits, and that really is true, because a conglomerate corporation really does not have a vested interest from a cultural standpoint in the holdings that it has. It views holdings as adding value to them for the purpose of increasing return on investment to the shareholders. A classic example of that is Lowe's. Lowe's, you've heard of Lowe's hotels, I'm sure. They're prominent in our area. And Lowe's has a hotel portfolio, a hospitality portfolio of maybe 20 properties or so around the country. But they're really not in the hotel business. They started in the hotel business kind of by accident. I think the Tisch family started the company, and they started their first hotel, I think, was in New York, then they went to Texas, etc. But they're a holding company that has all kinds of businesses that we would never even dream about that they had. Boulevard Watch and companies like that. And what they do is they buy and sell. They'll buy an organization, they'll reshape it financially, and what they'll do is they'll sell it for a profit for their shareholders. And for some reason, they still hold on to the hotel division. I think they always will. And that is a classic case of organizational culture, because I think the hotel business is in their hearts. It's in the hearts of the Tisch family, who are the senior people in the Lowe's organization. So I tell you about these chapters just give you terms, and it gives you brief descriptions of it. And you have production sharing, turnkey operations, and you don't need me to describe it for you here, especially since we're limited on time. A pause and proceed with caution strategy never was implemented much in the past. It certainly wasn't implemented much when these notes were first written. But today, given the economic situation, started as an economic downturn and then eventually evolved into an economic recession, the pause and proceed with caution strategy, which is really a temporary timeout, was used in 2 years ago, let's say, was used quite frequently. And eventually those strategies turned into retrenchment strategies. And after pausing through a phase of no change strategies, they went into retrenchment strategies where they actually significantly reduced their holdings, their assets. And of course, this is what created the high unemployment rates, which put a black mark on that period of time. You probably have seen, I hope you have seen, somewhere in your studies, the BCG matrix, the Boston Consulting Group Growth Share Matrix. It's it's a 4-quadrant matrix, and it identifies SPUs in terms of their standing in terms of both growth and cash flow. And a firm that is not necessarily high in growth but produces cash is called a cash cow. A firm that is high in growth and prospective growth and high in cash flow is considered a star. And some firms, some of the SBUs, seem to be high in growth, but their potential is unknown, it's uncertain, so they call those question marks. And then the ones that probably are considered for being divested are called dogs. They're called the dogs. Yeah, I'm sure you've seen that. And that's a simplified version of an approach that would help individuals decide on strategic directions. And the author then gets into functional strategies, which I've discussed with you probably too much, I don't know. But you're familiar with those. That's functions, functions by division, by department, by specialties. And so really, what these 2 chapters deal with is strategy formulation at the high corporate level, and the directional strategies that focus on growth, stability, and retrenchment, and integration strategies, horizontal strategies, vertical strategies, diversification strategies, stability strategies. I think after these notes, we'll start getting back to our practical basics that have served us so well so far. And I think we're out of time, so I think I will see you in the next